Hello, today I will show you how you can replace spark plugs on your Rover 75 2 liter or 2.5 liter KV6. This operation is a good idea to combine with replacing a cabin air filter and checking and cleaning out the drains that's below the cabin air filter housing or the brake servo. So all this combined, a good idea. So should we get on with it? Now let's do some spark plugs on Rover's lovely KV6 engine. Now, as you can see here, they are easily accessible on the front cylinder bank. All we need to do is get off two 8mm bolts to lift the engine cover off. But on the rear cylinder bank, as you can see here, the rear cylinder bank is practically invisible. But don't worry, we can remove some covers and get access. What I will start with is removing this rubber strip, then the insulating mat in the center here, because behind there you can unbolt the center section of the wall to access the spark plugs. But since we are doing the cabin air filter and cleaning out the plenum drains at the same time, we will remove the wiper arms and then the entire cover assembly that sits over here. And that will give even more room to replace the spark plugs. And removing the entire cover assembly will also give you much better space to replace the cabin air filter and good access to the draining points, which is a very critical point on these cars because they can get blocked and you can trap water inside and the water level can rise and damage your engine computer or get into your cabin air filter, and you can get water into the cabin of your car, and that is best avoided, to say the least. First, I start by removing the little plastic caps that sits over the wiper arm nuts. And then you will need a 15mm socket to loosen the nuts on the wiper arms. Now be careful not to lose the bushings that sits inside the wiper arm, because they can drop very easily down in drains and such, and that would be less than ideal situation. And to get the wiper arm off, I just put some pressure where the wiper arm is hinged, and then I can work it loose from the spindle. Just like that. Now we can remove the arm. And remember to be mindful of the bushing inside of the wiper arm so you don't lose it. And just copy the same procedure on the passenger side wiper arm. And now remove the rubber strip. And now we have to remove 7 fastening clips to remove the scuttle panel. You will need a flathead screwdriver, a small one, and keep your hand over the clip when you release it, because these can jump pretty far away. Now here you can see the cabin air filter and the engine ECU. I am very sorry, I forgot to record that I removed a cover, a separate cover that sits on top of the cabin air filter housing and engine ECU, and even a service cover that sits on top of the plenum cover. So I'm very sorry, but you will see how this is done when I put everything back together again. And now it's time to remove the plenum cover, and I will start at the driver's side of the car to lift it gently off the wiper spindles, and then I will move myself to the other side of the car and gently start lifting it up in the middle section, because you need to bend it slightly to get it past the bonnet hinges. And be careful, don't do this when the car is cold or outside when it's cold, because this particular car is 26 years old, and old plastic can get brittle and break when it's bent when it's cold. So make sure it has some temperature before you start doing this. And then it's off. And now I'll get off the midsection isolation mat, and that's just held on by 4 plastic nuts that you can simply undo with your hand. And that's the last one off, and then it's just to remove the isolation mat. Now it's just a case of removing 2 bolts that you need an 8mm socket to get off, and remove the center section. And now you can just lift it up, but you need to slide down this tubing that houses the engine ECU wiring. As simple as that. And here you can see how the tubing looks that houses the wiring for the engine ECU. And now I will just remove the engine ECU from its bracket, and that's as simple as pressing or depressing 2 plastic tabs on the rear end of the connector, and you can just lift the whole ECU up and place it safely to the side. Just like that, very easy. And now we have good access to the ignition coils on the rear cylinder bank. And the coils are held down by 2 small bolts each, and you will need an 8mm socket to get them loose. Now, the first bolt I start with, it is not enough room to use an extension to wrench it off, quite simply. But you can use an extension on all of the other fastening bolts for the coils. Now the bolts are loose enough so I can undo them by hand. And now we can undo coil number 2. And as you can see, I'm using an extension to undo this because it's actually space for it. And now it's loose enough to take the last bit by hand. Now the second bolt. Now that one's out, and now we'll do exactly the same on number 3. No reason to show you that, it's just the same procedure. And we can start taking the coils out. Now the first one's out, and as you can see it has some water on it, but that's because I washed the engine bay or cleaned it yesterday before doing this job. So I will take an air gun and blow out the spark plug holes and make sure that the coils are dry before I put them back in again. Now this car is still running strong on original 26-year-old factory fitted coils, so no doubt Bremmy coils are of excellent quality. And before I remove the spark plug, I will use some compressed air to blow out the spark plug holes to make sure there is no water in there or any debris around that can fall into the cylinders. Now the spark plug hole is totally dry. Now I will get a spark plug socket, a 16mm you need for these. The one I have here is very long and it's magnetic, and it's amazing to use because you never drop your spark plugs taking it out or putting a new one in. And now it's loose enough so I can undo it by hand. And now the old spark plug is out, and would you look at that, this spark plug is very worn indeed. It has been in this engine for many years. So these are totally in need of replacing. And here we have new spark plugs. I have chosen Denso spark plugs. I've used them for several years now. Very happy with them. And here you can see the spark plug number K16R-U11. And would you take a look at the difference between the old and new spark plug? I wouldn't be surprised if it burns the fuel a little bit more efficiently from now on. Now let's get the new spark plug in. Just start with easily threading down the spark plug as long as you can by hand. And now I'll tighten it down with a wrench, but you're not supposed to tighten spark plugs very much. 15 to 20 Newton meters is plenty. And if you don't have a torque wrench, you can just tighten it down do you feel resistance and make it just snug. A little twist after it naturally feels tight. And now we can get the coil back on again. Just like that. And now let's get the bolts back in place. I will apply just a tiny amount of grease on the threads because that will ensure that they don't rust in the future or create any sort of corrosion. And now the first bolt is entered. Now let's enter the second one before we get the wrench and extension and our 8mm socket to tighten these down. Now you're not supposed to tighten these small bolts very much. Hand tight is plenty enough. Now when that is done, you just copy the same procedure on the last two cylinders. There's no need for me to show you that because it's precisely the same. Now everything's back together here. Now we can move to the front cylinder bank of the engine, and as you can see here, it's not entirely the same setup because on the rear cylinder bank there are a separate coil above every of the three spark plugs. But here you have the coils in the center between the cylinder banks, and you have spark plug leads going to each of the three front cylinders, and you just pop them out, place them to side in the correct order so you get them in the correct place when you're putting everything back together. Now let's see if the spark plugs are equally bad on the front cylinder bank. Yes, I will definitely say so. Now, in with the new one. Now remember, not very tight, 15 to 20 newton meters is plenty enough. Now that is done, so just repeat the same process on the last two cylinders. That's the first one down. Now push the lid carefully down in this plastic bracket, but be a little bit careful because it can be brittle and crack. And that's everyone done. And before I move on to the cabin air filter, I will just start up the engine and make sure everything sounds right. Now that sounded rather lovely and smooth, I'd say. Now, with the spark plugs successfully done, we can move on to the cabin air filter. And to release the cabin air filter, you just lift up these catches and pull the filter out. See, as easy as that. Now, to get everything perfectly clean down in here, I want to remove the filter housing. Now I start by lifting up these tabs that hold in place this little wire harness that you can see here. And after that, we undo two small bolts that you need an 8mm socket to get off. And now we can just lift the filter housing out and place it to the side. And as you can see, it's a good idea to give this a proper clean before everything goes back together again. And now we can move over to the car again. And now we have good access to the draining points. The first thing I will do now is get out the vacuum cleaner to get out every loose dirt and debris and downfall from trees and so on and so on before we start a little bit of washing down in here. And now that the vacuuming is done, we can make sure that all the drains are open. If they are not, I usually like to use like a big screwdriver or something similar to make sure there are no blockages down in the drains. And we also have a set of drains out by the fenders. You need to control them as well. First sign you need to do something about these drains are if they are clogged, but just remember it doesn't help only unblocking them. You need to give those below the filter housing and brake servo some attention, or else you can have trouble waiting for you. So that is very, very important. Now I just stir a little bit around down in these drains, making sure they are absolutely free of any kind of debris. And now, as you can see, I have put some paper towel in the opening so we don't get any water drips into the blower motor. And it's very important not to get any water on this alarm unit. It will short out, so please be careful with water down in here. When I'm washing and rinsing afterwards, I will not use a garden hose. You can use a garden hose with very low pressure to rinse the bottom down in here, but I like to use a bottle of water because then I have a little bit more control of the water flow. Now I will get a microfiber cloth with some soapy water. I like to use car shampoo and wash the walls and the bottom area of the plenum chamber here as it's cold. And when you're rinsing off the soap afterwards, don't use rinse water on the walls here. Rinse the cloth thoroughly and dry off the walls with the cloth. You can rinse the bottom area down in here with a bottle of water to get everything out, and then dry everything afterwards before you put back on again the filter housing. Now remember to wash it first. And here we have the filter housing, so let's get that back in place. You can see 2 points down here. You place the taps there on the bottom of the filter housing, and then you just bolt it back in place. But also remember to clip back on that little wire harness on the top of the filter housing. And for heaven's sake, don't forget to remove the paper towels before you get the filter housing back in again. And that's the housing back in place, and now we can put in a brand new filter. Now I will start the reassembly process by putting back in place the middle section of this wall. And of course, before you can get that middle section properly in place, you need to slide back up again the tubing for the engine ECU wirings. And now we can enter the bolts. And tighten them up very slightly. No need to over tighten this. Hand tight is more than enough here. And now we can put back in again that little insulation mat that we took up first, and the tiny little plastic nuts that they are bolted in with. You don't have to thread them in. You can just align the mat in place, and you can push the little nuts just straight in. See, just as easy as that. And now we can continue with the cover that I forgot to show you that I removed earlier when we took everything apart. It's quite obvious how this is supposed to sit, and it's very important. There is a tiny little white rubber plug that's supposed to sit in the wall. You need to get that in place before you get this cover up that sits on top of the cabin air filter housing and the ECU. And now we can get the plenum cover back on again. But again, remember to be careful with this, because you have to bend it slightly to get it in place and align it properly, and it's old plastic. So be a little bit careful and cautious with this, and you will do fine. Now it's just a matter of working the panel up against the windshield so the little rubber strip meets the windshield, and you will see that the holes lines up so that you can put the mounting clips back in place again. And now we can just start pushing down the mounting clips one by one. And that's everyone down. And now we can put on the upper service covers that I also forgot to show you how I removed. These have a number of small tabs that are supposed to line up with holes in the panel itself. This is quite self-explanatory, and just work a little carefully around and you will get it perfectly and safely in place. Also, these can be brittle when they are cold, so be a little bit careful with that. And there we have both of those in place. And now we can put the wipers back on again. Do remember the difference between the passenger side and driver side wipers, because they are not similar. Now, I wouldn't tighten down the nuts for the wiper arms too much. I would say roughly about the same as spark plugs, maybe a tiny bit more, nothing more than that. And don't forget the tiny plastic covers that goes above the nuts. When that's done, remember to put back on again the rubber strip that goes over the entire length of the plenum cover. And when that's done, you can refit the engine cover. That is very simple. Line it up so the hole hits over the oil filler cap. Tighten down the two bolts with an 8mm socket. Only hand tight, no more than that. And when that's done, you are actually done. I hope this video was helpful, that you possibly have gained some confidence to do the spark plugs and the cabin air filter and the drains yourself on your 75 V6. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.